New year for us, isn't it, Karen?
It is.
This is our first time seeing folks in the new year. So, what is going on? Happy New Year, everybody. So, we are back, C3, live in full effect. Hopefully, your month of January is flying by like mine is. But we are here ready to kick this month off. And we thought we would swing for the fences with our first conversation and just lean into how the world is being impacted by all of the major news hot topics, but us as a conscious community, just what are we doing? How are we supporting our clients? And then, of course, just leaning in with curiosity, the way that we are practicing. And so, before we get going, if you are new to the C3 community and in our the organization and all its practitioners and leaders, I'm going to kick it over to Karen Huller, who is the thought leader of C3. And to give you a little background before we get rolling into this conversation, Karen, how's it going?
Happy 2024. I was so glad to see 2023 go, but also a little tenuous about what 2024 was going to bring. And here we are. So, if you're new to the C3 community, C3 stands for Corporate Consciousness Co op. We are an intentional community on LinkedIn that are committed to co creating a more conscious corporate landscape. And how we do that is, well, these events, these monthly events that happen. We find out what's going on in the world and what our members want to talk about, and just really have a conversation, a meaningful, authentic, transparent conversation. We will be talking about what other people are saying about the anti-DEI movement and how it's impacting our work as conscious leaders and practitioners. And if you, like us, are interested in just diving into these hard conversations so that we can figure out how to navigate them the best way together, then the link to join is right below my name there. So if you're not in the community, go ahead and do that. These are multi-streamed, these events across platforms, but the shelf life of them is short. So if you want the replay, get into the group where we share the replay live. And I have with us today Vince Blando and Mark Babbitt. Both have been very active C3 members and previous panelists who were very interested in diving to this topic. Normally what we do in C3 is we're kind of like the public broadcasting of LinkedIn groups, where we want people to tell us what they want to hear in terms of content. But we have a new committee and we haven't all gotten together to formulate a plan yet. And this was a very timely in the news trending topic that was impacting, lives as conscious leaders in a very meaningful way. So I'm so grateful that Vince, Mark, and Lawrence have been able to join us here today to talk about what's going on in DEI. Vince.
Yeah, it's funny. I don't even know how to kickstart this topic.
Do you want me to ask you a question to do that?
Please.
Okay. All right. Here's a prompt. Ready?
Yes, please.
Is there a right way, a white way? Is there a right way and a wrong way to look at DEI?
Yes, I actually believe there is a right way and a wrong way to look at it, though both right and wrong, and not to be wishy-washy, like they kind of it can be a bit relative depending on kind of where your viewpoint is and where your organization stands on doing the right thing. I'm a little under the weather today, so I'm already cranky, but this topic also kind of brings out like a little bit of fire in me. And I was thinking about this, leading into the call, that as an HR leader, it's something that I'm coaching people in. I'm in an organization right now that totally gets it. So I feel fully supported in this, which is wonderful. I've worked in places where it's kind of a foreign concept. Even though that there's been decades of progress made in these areas, right? There's still so far to go. And where I say the wrong way to look at DE&I is when people look at folks that are not straight white men and try to deny that those folks have a different experience and different obstacles that they need to face, both in relationships, in life, and in the workplace, I would say that is completely wrong as far as the viewpoint goes. And it's something that we need to not just be conscious of, but it's something we have to be actively vigilant to really try to conquer this issue.
Agreed. And I think that if we have to give voice to all the different experiences, do we also have to give voice to the people who are dismissing DEI?
Yeah, I mean, they look. Everybody's well. I used to be a human optimist, big time, Karen. You've known me a long time, and I really thought that we would naturally kind of evolve past some of the things that hold us back as a species, And I would say that, yeah, there are some logical arguments that I have heard that that would suggest, if you didn't dig into them too much, that America is an equal playing field now. Workplaces are an equal playing field. We've done enough to provide equal opportunities for everybody. I would say that they were wrong, but I would never shut somebody down over making that case. But
Mhm.
I wouldn't let it go unchallenged, regardless of where it came from.
That's what we're here to do, right? We're here to challenge everything. Yeah, definitely. Let's talk about it. Mark, how about you? Is there a right way and a wrong way to look at DEI? Oh, you got to mute.
It's funny how better you can be heard when you unmute.
Yeah.
I think there is a right way and a wrong way, and I, just like you, almost made a Freudian slip when I confused the word white with right, and it's gotten to the point, and we all get it. We all get the source of this. It's a backlash to the whole woke thing. It's Vince touched on this. It's white men of privilege not feeling so privileged anymore, or feeling threatened that their privilege is being taken away. It's white men of power not feeling as powerful as they used to. It starts with very identifiable sectors within our country here in the United States, Texas, Florida, the politics that are happening there. But in Texas, they wrote 40 bills that eliminate DEI within their state just in the last year. 40 bills changing the law, right? So there's a whole bunch of stuff going on here. Now, having said all of that, and never making excuses for those white people white men who don't feel as privileged and powerful as they used to. I mean, we in our book that came out a couple years ago, Good Comes First, we refer to this as boomer male syndrome, or BMS. And it was the older white men trying to retain control. Yep. And there's no excuse for that. But I will tell you, the advocates for DEI got off to just a terrible start with the whole process, because people started confusing DEI with affirmative action. Yeah. And instead of we came up with this acronym. Really what it's about is social justice. And if we're inequitable in our social justice, then DEI doesn't even sound like it answers the problem, right? And so the other part of this, Karen, that just drives me crazy, gets me cranky, to use Vince's word, is the people that are making the decisions aren't represented. It's a tilted game board. And like Texas, like Alabama, like Florida, like Washington, D.C. to a certain extent, especially in one political party over another, it's a whole bunch of old white males making decisions for everybody without listening to anybody. And that drives me nuts.
Fair enough. Do we want to delineate and distinguish between affirmative action and DEI? We should probably hit that right off the bat.
Yeah. I think, again, understanding, and to Vince and Mark's point, the contextual conversation that we're actually having, right? When we're talking about affirmative action and its creation, what it was being put in place for, it was for a lack of access, in which that in essence, affirmative action was defining equity, and not in the way that people try to arm themselves with the E in DEI, in that I worked hard to be here. That's not what affirmative action was. And equity in itself is a conversation of, do people have access to the things that they need to do their jobs well? And affirmative action was created so that people can get a shot, get access to things. And so when we begin to have this conversation of diversity, equity, inclusion, I'm going to take a page out of the playbook of Janet Stovall, who is the head of DEI at Neuro Leadership Institute. And her understanding, after years of us be leaning into this over the last several years, her understanding, like, people are taking this thing out of context. And so when you talk about the Civil Rights Act of 1964, why did it have to be created? It was, again, about access for people of color, Black people at the time, women. Like, now everything sits in the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and they figured out that wasn't actually enough. So affirmative action came into it, was like, hey, employers, institutions, it's actually not cool for you to actually close your doors to a large part of our population, kind of thing. And so now, to begin to bucket these things, to me, it's the loser shell game of control, to say, you know what, if I can just kill it by only acronyming it. Because now, like, if I was in a conversation, I was listening to Governor Newsom was on, I think it was Bill Maher, HBO, like, political commentary, and he made a point. It was like, say the words. Janet Stovall was like, say the words that I stand on diversity. If you could bucket it to an acronym that keeps changing every time, no matter who you're talking to, whether it's Jedi, Debbie, Idea, I like, it messes with the message of what this was supposed to be. And this was supposed to be, and Vince, you said it, in a lot of cases, organizations didn't have the actual depth and roots and foundation from a cultural value perspective to actually lean into this well. And so that's why a lot of organizations didn't, and they only did it on the heels and as a emotional reaction to what was happening in the world. And when you have emotional reactions, we all know what happens when you come to yourself. Things begin to calm down and go back to normal, as they've been trying to make them do for the last couple of years. Then you end up where we are, having anti-woke movements, which, again, you take that word out of context and what that actually really means, and you begin to weaponize things. And then you end up swinging to the pendulums of extremes. And so that's where we find ourselves at today, where you have these folks who are diversity, equity, inclusion practitioners now seeming to be on their heels defending the work. But also, I think there is an assessment of, did people actually even have a base understanding for the conversation? And to your point, Mark, I don't think people truly had an understanding of what they were trying to lean into. And for that, that's where you get the cop-outs of, I don't want to say the wrong thing.
Yeah.
Okay, so around this, you're fearful of saying the wrong thing. But if it had anything to do with the technical expertise and all the rest of this stuff, you don't mind calling people stupid. You don't mind, you don't mind messing up on the work. But this right here, all of a sudden, I don't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole because I don't want to be canceled and all. When have you ever been fearful of anything? And now all of a sudden, this is what has you scared. So that's
the fact that you might be
2-minute rant.
No, Lawrence, you made a great point there too about people having the right grounding and understanding, what DE&I is and what affirmative action is. And, I like to think I'm fairly well versed in it and I'm a champion of it. It's something I'm passionate about. But I misstepped a bit a few minutes ago when Karen asked me, is it the right or, is there a right or wrong way to look at it? My mind immediately went to, providing opportunities and access, not even, efforts from organizations where people are already there to make sure that we're making sure, that everybody is feeling, equitable, that they're being treated, as like everyone else is. And I just talked to a gentleman a couple weeks ago here, and the organization I'm working at right now is our U.S. office is fairly small, so there are some pockets here where I think we will, as we ramp up, we'll be able to address some of this stuff too, and on both sides of providing opportunities and making sure that people feel comfortable. And it's everybody's like, oh, it's 2020, it's 2024, we're a new country, everybody has the same, you want to be treated differently because you're different, and all this stuff, and all the anti-woke stuff. And I'm just like, wait a second. How does this hurt you that people are paying attention and trying to, unmarginalize people? I know that's not a word. Demarginalize people is probably the word. I don't know. How does that affect you? And it goes right to what Mark said, which is, there's people that have been propped up for centuries and longer based on the parents that they ended up being born to, the general color of their skin. And now that other people are trying to come in and achieve and gain status and live within society as an equal, somehow that threatens them. And to me, just the whole point of, just racism in general and just isms in general, I struggle with them because most of them are illogical, right? Like, where is the logic in thinking that you're different or superior because of the amount of melanin in your skin or what gender you were born, or how does that prop you up? And it's because it's cultural. And I know I'm whinging on here a bit, but Mark made a great point too, and about it being political. And if you try to ignore the political aspect of this, you're missing a big point, right? Because most of the anti-woke people are, they're easy to identify in terms of how they're voting, right? And it's, to me, it's become something that is a battle, right? And we still have people in this country, tens of millions of people in this country, that we just celebrated such an important observance in the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Day a couple of weeks ago. And there's still people I hear saying, well, why is that a holiday? And I'm like, what is wrong with you? Right? Do you realize the impact he had? Do you realize how much bloodshed he helped us avoid? And it's not a black holiday. It's an American holiday, right? He was a great American, not just a great black American. And, you'll hear the same thing next month with Black History Month. Well, why do we need a Black History Month? How do you think it would if we did a White History Month? And what I said to somebody last week that said that, I said, yeah, it's called every month is White History Month, right? People just have this weird thing where they have to feel superior somehow. And people that have had power, historically, we know they don't give it up without a fight. I could have summed that up in about 25 words now that I think about it.
Karen, we're not going to let you just serve as moderator today. We'd love to hear your thoughts on your question.
Absolutely. I'm diving in. Is there a right? So I'm the right and the wrong. This is where I hesitate to say anything's right and wrong. Yet there's my soul and how I feel about equity and where I feel like we should be as a society. To Lawrence's point, a lot of the DEI programs that people are pointing to say DEI is failing were an emotional reaction to a high, George Floyd and all of the things that were happening in 2020, and they weren't built on a foundation of the values that are needed in order to really appreciate what actually is being done here, no matter what you call it. Equal access to opportunity. I don't know how you can be against that, except that I see it. I see why you'd be. I see that you're the one that's been benefiting from all these opportunities, and that you have your own lived experience, and you aren't able to put yourself in other people's lived experience or listen or accept it. Like, that just seems so. It's the wall of the inability to empathize that I think. I want to say that's the wrong there. If you naturally empathize with people, it seems like common sense to make sure that people who weren't born into opportunity are able to access opportunity, that you give them some advantages where they've been disadvantaged. So, right and wrong is a, I probably threw you under the bus with the right and wrong thing, knowing that there's a thing, but I know that I see people saying this is right, this is wrong, and this is why we want to talk about it, because there are many sides to it. What is really making me cranky about this whole thing is people looking at failed DEI programs and saying, see that? See, it doesn't work, right? We were on the wrong track all along. We should have just kept things as they were. What? Like, how can you say that, though? If you think that the way DEI is being done is wrong, then what is your solution to making sure that we all have equity? It's kind of clear that they're just against the equity in the first place. You know what I mean?
And Karen, you just introduced something there that, from a development standpoint, I think is a key factor here that we can't jump past. You threw out that word empathy, which in conversations years ago, and as I'm in front of people and they throw out this word, empathy is a value for me and all these other things, and you get them to define it. And they double down on the one, it's having the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes. Well, if you're busy trying to put yourself in my shoes, then you're not busy listening to how I'm experiencing something.
That's right.
And then being a person who can hold a space for me, not try to feel for me, but feel with me. And because we haven't developed or helped leaders develop a dexterity to, again, because if you'll swing too far, there's sympathy. And we're not asking people, I don't need a box of tissues on my desk. I don't need you to cry with me. I just need you to be able to hold a space. And when in between heavy breaths as I cry, because I'm a heavy breath crier, I'm one of those. When I come down and my shoulders come down, you say, okay, Lawrence, it seems like you're processing a lot.
Yep.
Help me understand what you need for us to move forward, or you to move forward, or whatever this thing is. It's a development gap. And so to Mark's earlier point, who wants to be called incompetent when it comes to something? DEI, or diversity, equity, and inclusion, exposed the empathy gap. Therefore, people are having a visceral reaction to it, so they rather not. They're like, I don't want to be vulnerable for the sake of, and you were defining it, Karen, the privilege to not to have to do it. And so I could take it off the board. And here's the funny part. I was talking to somebody earlier who does this work for a company, and they're trying to turn DEI into a product.
Mm.
And they're having a hard time with sales. Go figure. But you talk, and they're trying to matrix it, quantify it off the basis of it being a product. You can't. Something like this has to have head, heart, gut alignment. And if we're really, truly going to have this conversation, it has to be something that can connect to it being a lifestyle, not just another thing we do. and again, you cannot leave but behavior behind, values behind, culture behind. You can't leave it behind if you're going to do this, I believe, to be transformative work. And again, for a lot of organizations and their leadership chains, you're putting me back at a skill level 1. I've been in my career, I've been in my seat for way too long for you to, I get ticked all the way back down to skill level 1. That's never been a part of our allowance of leaders outside of be a SME. You got rewarded, you got promoted for being a SME. Now all of a sudden I got to be in this room with people and I got to say, I'd actually have no clue where to start. And that exposure in and of itself is like opening up a wound that nobody wants anybody else to see. And so I think that in and of itself, and that's, I mean, I'm in my head, I'm still working through that, as y'all can hear. But I mean, so when we think about this, how do we get it on the table though, as a necessity? Because I see this as the mortar to the bricks of an organization. It's a part of it. It's glue to me. I don't know. What are y'all's thoughts?
Part of me wants to just let those organizations, sorry about that, Mark, just
That's
go
okay.
and fail. Just go and fail. Do it your way, fail. You know, like the world is transforming. It's not just, you know, organizations. And there's resistance. And, you know, if you look at all kind of movements in the world, there's always going to be some resistance. And hopefully in the end, the good guys won. And this is what we're doing here, right? We're trying to gather our power so that we can overcome this resistance and get to the other side, you know, where there is equity. We don't have to call it anything. It's equity. We have a diverse, you know, workforce. We have, you know, that everybody's lived experiences is valued. So I feel like these companies that want to deny diversity, deny equity, deny, like they're not, I feel like they can't possibly survive into, you know, the next decade, especially with these younger generations coming into the workforce. I feel like they're just not going to tolerate it. But I hope it doesn't take that long at the same time.
Well, I'll add this, and Lawrence, it's actually you who made me think about this, and that is how this development gap thing, right? We've been talking for 15 years about this word empathy, and empathy has been turned into active listening, which is part of it. That is no doubt about it. But what people in power tend to do is, even if they do actively listen and try to understand your experience, now we say, okay, well, let me tell you how you should feel about that. Right? That is the opposite of empathy. That is you being in power. That is you expressing your privilege, right? And it's people that make that leap, and then they tell me, as a consultant, they'll tell me, Mark, I listened, and then you told them what to think. I mean, we didn't even build that bridge yet, and you've burned it down, and
Yep.
you know, you've lost all credibility at this point. And I don't. You're right, Lawrence. It's not just a development gap; it's an execution gap. It's a I'm going to remain in control no matter what, even when I pretend I'm actually listening to you. And how are people supposed to react to that? How can they, or maybe better asked, how can they react in any other way other than you just piss me the hell off?
Well, I'll tell you what, this current generation of young professionals and students, to be honest with you, well, they're going to leave. You're not going to keep them. To react like that to them, and rightfully so, it's seen as an affront and an insult to tell me how I should feel or think about something, and more power to them, right? To stand up for themselves. You know, we talk about, again, right way and wrong way to look at DE&I in an organization, not even societally. You know, people are doing these things to check a box, right? Like, hey, look what we did. Look how diverse we are, right? I was sitting through a new hire process some time ago, and we were hiring a female a female employee into what had been like a very male dominated team. And the people that were fighting over her, the leaders that were fighting over her, weren't fighting over her because of skill set. They were fighting over her because they're like, oh, look, I can show you how diverse I am because I've got a woman on my team. And and that was actually stated. That wasn't even like a kind of like an under the surface type of motivation. And it's just like, well, an organization has to look at this from a couple of different ways. One, all the studies, all the literature says that a more diverse workforce is a more profitable, it gets more done. The thought diversity that comes from people of different backgrounds and experiences provides insight into problems that you would not have solved as quickly, without it. So there's a business case to be made for doing diversity, equity, and inclusion the right way and for the right reasons. But going back to the first thing we talked about is, again, denying and the anti-woke movement to me, and it does. And if there are millions of people out there that feel this way politically, that feel this way on social media, that feel this way in how they vote, well, those people also have leadership positions in organizations, in government, right? And so, what does that tell you? It tells you that, how do I put this? We say the right and wrong is tough to say, but some people are just wrong, right? Ethically wrong, philosophically wrong, logically wrong. And it's because, to Mark's point, although he didn't put it as bluntly, we have a centuries old, and if you want to go back further than centuries, in the Western world, of holding people down to prop other people up. And that is not easily let go, no matter how illogical it is, no matter how evil it is, right? And it's people of color, it's women, it's people that worship differently, countries of origin, being a member of the LGBTQ plus community, right? Whether it's explicit or not, a lot of people have, a lot of organizations have done unconscious bias training, right? Very key, very important self-awareness tool. How are we addressing conscious bias, right? Because that's what the anti-woke movement is. It's conscious bias. And we had something happen in the country 6 years ago where we were getting to the point where, and again, I don't know that it's better that you didn't know necessarily how people felt about these issues outwardly, but all of a sudden, tens of millions of these folks were empowered to wear it on their sleeve and on their flags and on their bumper stickers, right? And how do you put that cat back in the bag? It's going to take time to heal from this, if we even can. So that's where I get cranky about it.
Yeah. And I think there's this point too in the operationalizing of the empathy. And actually, again, contextually, I'm full blown research mode now, finishing up my literature review in organizational leadership, and words matter to me now more than they have before. Like I was always that dictionary.com word of the day guy. But now going to like historically find, woke from the beginning of it, before it began to be weaponized, it really was, again, this idea of an adjective being able to describe, hey, let's not be blind to racial prejudice, discrimination, sexism, denial of rights to LGBTQ plus communities. Like that's what it meant to be woke, is, hey, don't be that conscious biased person who is explicitly saying, I'm not going to say anything to that. And so now when organizations, like they're trying to put themselves back in, because again, what was the thing before COVID happened? Were 3 big things you couldn't talk about in the workplace: race, religion, politics. They're now trying to backtrack something they threw out there. They made it available for us to all begin talking about and it now being allowed. Case in point, on one of the organizations I work for, after transition out the Army, I was in a program. We were trying to get leaders to start having conversations about unconscious bias. I love that you brought this up, Vince. We was like, hey, everybody has bias. That's how we were approaching it. Like, spoiler alert, everybody has it. And then one of the leaders that we were circulating this with says out loud, it was just a couple of us meeting with them, says out loud, you know what? It's getting really hard to be an older white guy in this country these days. I'm like, where's Ashton Kutcher? Where's Ashton Kutcher? Like, did he just quote? And I said, before I could say anything, the guy next to me goes, man, finally, how long did it take you in your life?
Yeah.
You're just now feeling it? And it was like, and he looked at it, and it was that moment. They're saying the quiet parts out loud.
Yep.
That's exactly what's happening now. And people are calling it out. Where before they could say the quiet parts, and what kept it unconscious is nobody had a reaction to it.
That's right. Now
that people feel empowered to have a reaction to it, or at least, hey, what do you mean by that? And they're like, which part? Because they didn't even hear themselves say it.
Nope.
Because
just
even
questioning it, they see it as an insult, right? Trying to point out to them, or even try to have a logical conversation about their stance, is seen as an imposition on their rights because of the, old, powerful white man now is a victim somehow.
Now they're worried about getting canceled.
That's
they're
right.
Using that word, right? Getting canceled, and they're free speech, right? Oh, don't suppress me. That's my free speech.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you feel suppressed because somebody had a reaction to what you said? Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, no, Karen, you're absolutely right. It's because think about it. For forever, they could just do what they wanted. I say they. I'm a 51-year-old, white male. Am I powerful? No. But have I been given opportunities? Have I gotten chances that I probably wouldn't have gotten if I was in a different, more marginalized demographic? Yeah. I have this conversation with my son, and he's a freshman in college now, and he's making me proud because, he and I have had some really deep philosophical discussions about these types of things. And what I've told my son and my daughter and people that will listen to me preach about this stuff, for lack of a better word, goes right back to what Lawrence said a little bit ago. Empathy, right? Sympathy. As much of an ally as I try to be in how I fight for things and the people that I fight for, I am just an ally, right? I can't put myself in a person of color's shoes just because I grew up with them, just because I played sports with them, just because they're some of the best friends that I've ever had. It doesn't matter. I have a different experience, right? What I tell my son is don't ever think that you can know how somebody else feels. Just know that their experience is different than yours, and keep that in mind. And whether it's empathy or sympathy, especially during some of the stuff that was going on with the Floyd reactions and things like that, you're allowed to be sympathetic to a community that's going through something like that, right? But just know that these people in these different demographics have a different experience than you have as a straight white male, right? How you take that and work with it, you're going to figure that out as you go. But if you ignore that and think that it's an even playing field, kid, I did something wrong, right? Because nothing could be further from the truth. And I've done a lot wrong, guys, as a parent. Trust me. I will never win Father of the Year, but I try hard.
Vince, let me just ask the group as a whole. All right, so you brought up something that makes me want to talk about how people are talking about this being reverse racism. Okay, it's hard to be an old white guy in America right now. Is there a way to execute diversity, equity, inclusion in a way that doesn't discriminate against old white guys? And what does that look like? Vince is definitely, I mean, Lawrence is like, yeah, there's a way to do that. Yeah. So,
well, I don't think there's.
Let me speak. I'll speak as a old white guy. I'm a 63-year-old white guy. I definitely qualify. This is going to happen. It's going to happen organically. It's going to happen naturally. And that's when guys my age with my color of hair finally decide to retire. And to Lawrence and Vince's point earlier, other people don't even think about that. We hire the right person for that can go do the job. And we don't care about gender. We don't care about skin color. We don't care about what school they went to. Right. I mean, there's a whole bunch of demographics that we all have bias against. Right. I was in sales for a long time, and I had a boss that came to me and said, "We're only going to hire people that are high D's on the DISC assessment test." And I went, "Why?" Well, that's because that's who sells well. Why? I said, "Don't you want relationship builders? Don't you want critical thinkers? What's the system here?" Well, he and I never did get along. I challenged him and said, "I'm going to go and hire a dozen outside salespeople, and I will compete against your 110 high D's that are doing inside sales from a call box, and my 12 people will outperform your 105, or I will quit." And 1 year later, he didn't quit, but we outsold them. 12 people outsold them. Relationship builders, women, brown people, Asian. I don't know how to classify him. He would identify as gay Asian male, right? This very diverse group of relationship builders outsold 105 people, right? And we didn't care about anything other than, can you do the job well? Can you build the relationships necessary to, when people have a decision to make about their HR sales, their HR vendors, would they go anywhere besides you? And if the answer to that question is no, that's all I cared about. I didn't care if they went to Rutgers or Harvard or Oregon State or Alcorn State. I didn't care, right? We just had to hire the right people in the right place. And by the way, this isn't a new thing for me. Way back in the 1980s in Silicon Valley, which I don't think anybody would admit how biased Silicon Valley was then. Unless you were a white male, you couldn't get funding for your company, right? Period. End of story, right? And it wasn't until much later that people from Asia started coming in, and Eastern Europe started coming in and women started coming in and getting funding. But at that time, it was only white males. And I had a business, and I hired the best person for the job, and it turned out to be a black male, 6'4", 220, solid muscle, who could be incredibly intimidating. And I had a woman from purchasing in Toshiba who told me that she really likes everything about us, but she didn't like talking to Barry because Barry was intimidating. And when I kept pushing and pushing and pushing to find out what made him so intimidating, because Barry's one of the nicest guys on the planet until he gets mad, and it was because he was black. And so she was going to withhold a $400,000 contract because my office manager was a black man. And I just had to say, you walk away then, because this isn't the company for you. And we don't do things like that here. $400,000. My company was only doing $500,000 a year at the time. And I had to walk away from a $400,000 contract as an older white guy who just said, we're not playing that game here. We're not doing that here. Right. So the bottom line is, this has been going on forever, and it's not going to change until guys like me decide that's not how we're going to play the game in this shop, in this business, in this industry, in this state, whatever it is. Especially, we keep going back to politics until the people in control, because they're never going to be willing to relinquish control, right? That's not going to happen. That's where this generational shift is going to have to happen, because frankly, there aren't enough people. I mean, look what's happening in the State House in Tennessee right now. It's just a disaster from a equity point of view, right? It's and they don't even try to hide it.
Nope.
Because they know they're in control right now. Well, 22 years from now, when the next generation comes along, do you really think they're going to tolerate that crap? They are not. And you're going to be out on your ear, and you're going to be embarrassed. You might even be blackballed because you were that guy 22 years ago. So more power to him. Now, the one thing I do want to say really quick, because I know I've gone on forever. This is not just a political thing for me. The four of us are talking a lot about being against wokeness and all that, and for social justice. I just want to say for the record, I am not one of those liberal guys. I am a fiscally conservative. Until 6 years ago, voted 80% Republican when I voted. I am not one of these guys that flies a liberal flag over my head all the time. It's not who I am. It's not what I believe. But I do believe in treating everybody the same. And in my business, in my coaching of athletics, I've coached baseball for 35 years. Everybody gets the same shot. I don't care who you are. I don't care who your parents are. You follow the same rules, and that's the way I've been forever. And I hope to be like that forever.
Well, I think there's an important thing that gets lost, right? And we got Karen. I don't know if they're on your side of LinkedIn or mine, but this idea of going to the extremes of being against the way somebody says something, but it actually being a behavior and operationalize what we say we believe. And then for me, showing respect to another person is all my core values are action words. What Mark described in that story of walking away, how many times I've been a part of organizations who have said yes to a deal, knowing that the person they were about to do the deal with was going against every core value poster they had on the wall. And then they paid twice as much to actually get out of the relationship than it would have cost them if they would have just said no from the beginning. And so I'm glad you put your values into action, because what you did is modeled behavior, which is one of the things we say as leaders, as conscious leaders, is just don't have the awareness that the right thing exists. It's about modeling the right thing. And then no matter how uncomfortable it may make you feel, but here's also as a professional coach, I'll ask, what about that made you uncomfortable? Because if you say right is right, why does right make you uncomfortable? And so for me, like, you actually did what you were supposed to do when something like that happens, because your values hired that leader. Your values fit sewn into that leader. You had equity in that leader, so much so that you were willing to make a decision like that. And you probably slept like a baby that night. You're like, we ain't missed nothing. Like, it was, yeah. Go ahead, Mark. You're on mute. You're on mute. Unmute yourself.
Sorry, I just trying to be comic relief.
Mm-hmm.
My then wife had a fit. like we were filing divorce papers. Like,
oh wow.
Sorry, I gotta. But yes, even with that, I slept like a baby that night.
Yeah.
For you.
This is the part I think of this conversation, that when we are in these spaces, and this is why more leaders like us need to help model and facilitate for organizations. If you want to build lasting trust, create spaces like this, where it's okay not to know. It's okay to not have the words, but be a part of the conversation and be a part of the action part. I could care less if you could spell it, but can I see you do it? Like that's my thing. Actions over ideas. We can literally make cute posters and all the rest of this stuff, but what does it look like in action? And I'll say it this way: one of my last actions within an organization is putting our core values into practice when we had an incident on the floor with tenured employees versus new employees where race stuff came up. And as a leadership group, the swiftest movement of paperwork I ever seen in my life was like, it was boom, 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 boom. This is easy. Why? Because we connected it to the core values and code of conduct of the organization. So you asked Karen, how can we in leadership, and how can we do it? It has to go and be connected to how we are, not just another thing that we have to have a program for certain times of the month so I can roll my eyes about it because I don't really feel like it connects to me. No, if you connect to our core values, then everything we do here you'll connect to, even on a humanity level. And I think that's how you do it. Set the foundation, everything else will follow.
Makes so much sense. Yeah, I'm going to address this comment from a LinkedIn user here. It says, earlier it was mentioned that the newest generation of professionals are not going to be tolerant to the lack of empathy of leaders in the workplace. I'm wondering if they're also intolerant of this conscious bias movement that we see happening. Are they more vocal and more likely to speak up against this conscious bias? I'm assuming she's referring to the younger generations. I see them being very vocal. I see them being very civically engaged because they know it's their future that's at stake. However, it can go another way completely. And I hope it doesn't. But if it does, then nobody's really going to have a voice that needs a voice. So it can go either way. Vote accordingly. That's what I say. One other thing that I wanted to address, there's two other things actually. One is, Mark, you were saying, the job goes to the most qualified person or the best person for the team. And that is actually an anti-DEI, that's what they're saying. It's like, we just give the person who's the most qualified the job. And that works when you have an equally diverse pool of candidates.
Yes.
But because of the lack of access to opportunities that has been systemic for many years, and we're not on an equal playing field yet, you have to do work. You have to do some extra work to make sure that, and this is Mark Cuban's counterpoint to the anti-DEI statements. And he had a really great, engaging conversation with people where he was leaning into the conversation. He was taking on comments, he was addressing them. And that's a Twitter thread that I'll share in I did share in the C3 group. But his point is, you have to make sure at first your candidate pool is diverse. You have to go out and seek, the candidates that are, because if they haven't had the equal access to opportunity, then it looks like there's more old white guys that are qualified for everything, So I just wanted to say, from a recruiting standpoint, since that was what my job was, and I had my first diversity search in 2000. We exclusively looked at historical Black colleges and universities for our candidates, and that was before we had LinkedIn. There was no social media. The internet wasn't even a credible source of information, according to the owner of my firm. I had to go directly to these colleges, and that's really just the piece that was really making me mad, is that there was the merit problem, that they're saying that people are getting jobs without merit. And once you have a diverse candidate pool, give the job to the person who fits the best, who's the most qualified. But make sure you have the diverse candidate pool as well. And then Vince, you said earlier, the numbers make sense. Like, we know now that a strong, diverse workforce is going to produce profit. Emily Zhang, who is a very vocal DEI thought leader, has said that shouldn't be the reason, though,
No.
to Lawrence's point, that you do DEI. It's, again, attached to the core values. So I was at a conference last month, November, and the head of DEI for Independence Blue Cross was speaking on belonging, opened the floor to questions. Everybody's throwing softballs, and I'm like, excuse me, how is the anti-woke movement affecting your work? And the whole room went quiet, and he blushed, and he stepped back, and he turned around, and you could tell he was thinking, how do I how do I address this question? And he used like for corporation, an organization. Let's take the people out of it. Let's just look at an entity. It needs to make money, okay? But there are people in the organization, so it has to be both. Yes, this makes sense for organization because the numbers work, and yes, this makes sense for us because these are our values.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, and an important part of what you just said, Karen, is one of the traits of this boomer male syndrome thing, which we completely made up, is that people that suffer from BMS look to hire, mentor, promote people who look, think, and act like them. And that's, again, it's a generational thing. We're not going to convince a 70-year-old CEO to change overnight. It's not going to happen. But let's hope the 48-year-old and certainly the now 26-year-old, when they get to that position, they've grown up expecting a diverse candidate pool, expecting a diverse classroom, a diverse football team, right? That 70-year-old did not have. And so I think it's if I was going to give one piece of advice to a leader today, it would be to avoid the tendency to promote, hire, mentor people who look like you.
Yeah, my experience in working with struggling teams and organizational dynamics projects, I can honestly say, and this isn't just for show for this exercise, the teams that struggled the most, both from an employee relations standpoint, from a performance standpoint, from a conflict resolution standpoint, were the least diverse. It's when those directors, those vice presidents, have in their mind the type of person that they want on their team. And look, it's human nature that we have to kind of overcome here with some of the DE&I stuff, in that a lot of people just are more comfortable with people that are like themselves. And it's something we have to outgrow as leaders, right? And those groups that I worked with, these folks would just, I want somebody from this school. Invariably they were the same kind of demographic makeup, and it didn't work. I mean, I think I've said this before. I couldn't work with me. When I'm recruiting for people on my team, I need people very different than me, or else it's going to be a disaster, right? That's an extreme case, but yeah, I mean, you need to make sure that you have thought diversity. And Karen, I hope you don't think that I was saying that it was the business cases that make this important, because we started with kind of like the right and wrong, in the beginning. But even if you're just numbers driven and results driven, this is something that should speak to you.
That's an and. That's I didn't mean to. Yeah, I didn't mean to imply that.
Oh no.
Yeah.
For sure.
I think there's something, and I love Vince and Karen that you brought up the and in there. I think that's what allows people to set up camp. When it's a this or converse, when they think it's a this or that, there's a right and a wrong. It could be right, wrong, indifferent. That's why the phrase "we're going to agree to disagree" is a thing. Mm-hmm. As I get older, all of those anecdotal, those little quotes that we used to like just say as t-shirt, like I'm seeing it play out real time, where I'm like, what happened to the just agree to disagree? And so this visceral discourse, and it's not even constructive anymore, to the extent of now it's just left with the person that has the authority or the decision to make. They'll choose whatever they feel is right because everybody stopped talking. Mm-hmm. Everybody threw their hands up to this thing. And now we as organizations and going into do leadership development program and all the rest of these things, again, it makes dollars and cents. McKinsey and Deloitte and them have been tracking this stuff for decades, that this stuff make like diversity, inclusion, and equitable spaces lend to people being more motivated, engaged, and productive. It's a thing and has been a thing. It's coming out in my research. I can't wait to drop it because y'all, this stuff, is so baffling that there are thousands upon thousands of articles of research that it just makes sense behaviorally.
Right.
Yeah.
And
Well,
it's
going-
in our
yeah.
behaviors where we're missing this thing.
Yeah.
And so that's where, like, now as leaders, now this is where you hold the line. Who do we want with us in this thing? And what do we look like when we have the right teams, when we have the right levels of organization, to where now we are and we can. I was with one of the first organizations I was with, one of their biggest markers on themselves, and one they patted themselves on the back for, was their high percentage of filling open roles with internal hires.
Mm.
And on the surface, that sounds good, right? It was not. It was not. And so what they started finding is, I was wounded over there, and now I'm taking my wounded self over there. And now I'm just now leaving a bloody trail of tears all throughout the organization. And so you end up with compound interest of hurt, harm, and danger.
Mhm.
And so now for us, as we talk about, okay, how do we get out in front of this, being conscious leaders and having this conversation, is about, can we hold these courageous, brave, strange, safe not to be psychologically safe spaces where people are just leaning in to learn just
Yep.
how to be better for each other. Like that's where I'm at with it.
Totally. But if you look at, back to what you said, why aren't people talking, right?
Mm-hmm.
The anti-woke person will tell you, well, I'm not allowed to tell you how I feel anymore.
There you
Right?
go.
Right? I'm not allowed to tell you how I feel anymore because anything I say is going to get me canceled. Well,
Mhm.
instead of looking at it as why don't you look at what it is that's on your heart that you're trying to share with people, and really play it against right and wrong, right? And because generally, like, you're not going to get canceled for well, look, a lot of what they want to share is just not ethical. It's not right. Going back to the very beginning of this conversation, well, I can't tell you how I really feel, because I'm a rich white guy and everybody's against me. It's not just a matter of creating the safe space. It's also holding those people accountable that are in leadership positions. That's the tougher part.
Well, I tell you what, guys, what some of the best advice I ever got was, don't be so willing to name the enemy.
Mm-hmm.
And it took me a while for that to sink in, because it was an old white guy who said it, and so he said it, and I went back like 6 months later. I went, "This is gnawing at me. Tell me what that means to you, because I'm having a hard time figuring out what it means to me." So, well, as soon as you're willing to name the enemy, that means you stop looking for common ground. Right. And again, we can do this all over the political spectrum. We can,
Yes, we
MAGA,
can.
Republican versus Democrat, young versus old. This has been the gist of the entire conversation, men versus women, right? The people that are willing to name the enemy will do whatever it takes to destroy the enemy,
Yeah.
instead of finding common ground.
Mark,
right?
I have a phrase that says, we cannot unify if we vilify.
Mm-hmm. That's it. Karen,
Yeah.
that is it exactly. That's it exactly. So we tell executives all the time, because we work in the company culture space where people are vilified, even maybe even canceled in today's world, depending on the political spectrum you come from. It seems to be a knee-jerk reaction, right? And an hourly employee for Burger King says something racial, being mad. Now we're going to boycott Burger King. One person out of 60,000 employees, right? We named the enemy, right? And like, it was one person who had a bad morning, who has not had a bad morning, right? And so if we can avoid vilifying, if we can avoid stereotyping, if we can avoid naming the enemy and focus instead on common ground, then I think now we get back into ensuring social justice. And let's not throw acronyms at it. Let's make sure that everybody has the same opportunity to excel in this world.
I would love for us all to want the same outcomes. That would be the, the end goal. So we went a little bit over time because and I kind of figured this was going to be a topic that was going to keep us talking for a while. But I know that we all, stretched some things to make this happen before the end of January here, and while it was still, actively in the news cycle. And I'm so glad that we did. This is obviously, as usual, a very animated conversation, and I appreciate all of your viewpoints and experiences. And I also appreciate everybody who's been watching and commenting, and thank you very much. And we will be here next month. I believe purpose is on the docket for February. We got I think we have 5 people on the panel potentially for next month. So, and then Mark and Vince and Lawrence and I are on the committee. We'll be talking about, what things to come. We'll be getting together and planning out the rest of 2024 and all the great things that C3 will do to help bring these topics to the surface so that we can lean in and figure out a path forward together.
All right, everyone. Well, hey, always a pleasure, gentlemen. And it's a great start to a new year.
Yeah, thank you guys. It was great. It's great seeing everybody and great conversation. Too bad we don't have another 7 hours to fix the rest of
it. That's what I was just going to say, Vince. It's a good thing Karen stopped us, or the 4 of us would go on forever about this topic.
All right. Well, y'all lean in, join the community. We'll see you all next time.